Alright. Hello, fellow sapiens. Since you clicked on the first bow, or how humans learn to store time as power, you're here for something quiet. Not noise, not drama. Just evidence, patience, and the long story of how a simple object taught our species to wait, to plan, and to act in the future tense. This is Sleepless Homo. Soft science and slow storytelling for tired thinkers. We look at archaeology, anthropology, and deep time the way sediment is uncovered. Carefully, humbly, layer by layer. We don't rush. We don't pretend certainty where it doesn't exist. We follow what the evidence suggests. And we sit with the implications. Now imagine this. A moment when nothing moves, yet something has already begun. A human hand releases nothing, strikes nothing, touches nothing, and still an action is already underway. The force has been prepared earlier, stored quietly, waiting. The outcome no longer belongs to the instant of effort, but to a decision made seconds before, perhaps minutes, perhaps days. What kind of tool behaves like this? What kind of technology does not act when the body acts, but when the mind decides it is time? For most of our history, force was immediate. A blow landed when the arm swung. A thrust ended where the body reached. A stone struck when it left the hand. Action and consequence were bound tightly together, inseparable in time. Even the most carefully shaped stone blade obeyed this rule. The cut happened when muscle contracted. The moment of intention and the moment of effect were the same. Archaeology is full of such tools because they leave clear traces, impact scars, fracture patterns, cut marks on bone. The story of force was visible, readable, and tied directly to motion. And then, at some point that does not announce itself clearly in the ground, something changed. Humans began working with materials that could remember an action and release it later. We do not know for certain when the first bow was made. Wood decays, fibre disappears, sinew returns to soil. But the absence of the object does not erase the physics behind it. Elastic energy is not leverage and it is not impact. It is property of matter that allows force to be accumulated gradually and released suddenly. A bent branch stores work. A stretched tendon holds tension. These are not abstract concepts imposed later by physics. They are properties that humans encounter directly through repeated interaction with living materials. Anyone who has bent green wood knows that some branches snap while others resist and return. Anyone who has pulled animal sinew understands that tension can be held without breaking. Long before these properties were named, they were felt in the hands. This distinction matters because elastic systems behave differently from everything that came before them. Leverage multiplies force in the moment of action. Impact concentrates energy at the point of contact. Elasticity separates effort from outcome. It allows a human to work slowly, carefully, even gently, and still release great force later. The bow does not demand speed or strength at the instant of release. It demands preparation, restraint, and timing. In this sense, it is not simply a new weapon. It is a new relationship between the body, matter, and time. Archaeologically, this relationship is difficult to see because it does not leave obvious marks. There is no single fracture pattern that announces elasticity. No preserved wooden arc that reliably survives tens of thousands of years. Instead, the evidence appears sideways. Stone points become lighter, thinner, more standardized. Impact damage suggests higher velocity than the human arm alone can generate. Fractures on animal bone indicate penetration without close contact. Experimental archaeology has shown that these signatures align better with projectile systems than with thrusting spears or thrown darts alone. Still, scholars speak cautiously. We do not claim certainty. We speak in probabilities, converging lines of evidence and comparative patterns across regions and time. What matters here is not the exact date, but the conceptual shift. At some point, humans began interacting with materials under tension repeatedly enough to understand their behaviour. This was not a single invention moment. It was likely a slow accumulation of knowledge across generations. Children bending branches, hunters experimenting with sinew bindings, craftspeople learning which woods resisted fatigue and which failed silently. These interactions did not announce themselves as technological revolutions. They emerged as habits, as preferences, as quiet refinements passed along without explanation. With elasticity, time enters technology in a new way. Force is no longer locked to muscle contraction. It can be stored, delayed, released when conditions are right. This introduces a subtle but profound change in how action is planned. The success of the act now depends on earlier decisions. How long the wood was seasoned, how evenly the fibres were aligned, how much tension the material could tolerate without permanent deformation. These choices happen long before the moment of use. Archaeologically, this is difficult to track because preparation leaves fewer marks than impact. But cognitively, it is unmistakable. The tool requires thinking ahead in a way that immediate force tools do not. Human interaction with tensioned materials predates the bow. We see it in binding, in hafting, in nets and snares whose organic components rarely survive. But the bow brings these interactions into a single, integrated system where failure is costly and success depends on precision. Too much tension and the material fails. Too little and the system is ineffective. This balance must be learned, it must be felt, and it must be remembered. Knowledge becomes embodied, not written, carried in muscle memory and shared through demonstration rather than instruction. This is where the emergence of time as a mechanical variable becomes visible. The act of drawing a bow separates preparation from release. The human body pauses while force accumulates. This pause is not passive. It is filled with assessment, distance, wind, movement. The decision to release is no longer identical to the decision to act. There is now a gap, a waiting period where nothing happens externally, but everything is already in motion. In that gap, strategy begins to take shape. We tend to associate strategy with social complexity, with hierarchy, with later developments in human history. But here, strategy emerges quietly, embedded in material interaction. It does not require language beyond gesture. It does not require symbols. It requires patience and an understanding that the future can be shaped by actions taken earlier. The bow does not simply extend the arm, it extends intention forward in time. This has consequences beyond hunting. Once humans learn that effort can be stored, the logic applies elsewhere. Preparation gains value. Delay becomes useful. Anticipation becomes a skill. These are not moral changes, they are mechanical ones. They arise not from ideology or belief, but from repeated engagement with matter that behaves predictably under tension. The world begins to feel less immediate, less reactive. It becomes something that can be prepared for. Archaeologists remain cautious because elastic technologies leave ambiguous traces. A stone point does not announce whether it was propelled by arm, lever, or stored energy. Context matters, pattern matters, distribution matters. Scholars compare assemblages, fracture types, and faunal remains across regions. They run experiments, they break replicas, they measure penetration. Even then, conclusions are framed carefully. We say that certain technologies are consistent with bow use. We do not say they prove it beyond doubt. This humility is part of the discipline. It is not weakness, it is precision. And yet, even with uncertainty, the conceptual shift remains clear. Somewhere in deep time, humans learned that force did not have to be immediate, that action could be delayed, that a decision made earlier could shape an outcome later without additional effort. This is the first moment where a human act is completed in the future, not the present. To understand this delay, we must first step into the world where silence mattered. Tonight's episode is part of the Tool Evolution series, a Sleepless Homo Mini-Universe, a quiet, cinematic, scientific anthology tracing how our species became itself, not through destiny, not through ideology, but through objects we shaped, lost, rediscovered, and perfected. Tools tell the story of human evolution without politics, without drama, just continuity, just wonder. If this kind of calm education helps you think, sleep, work, or drive a little more peacefully, consider liking the video and subscribing. It quietly helps other sleepless minds find their way here too, and I'm curious, how are you listening right now? Before sleep? While working? Let me know in the comments. And if you drift off, don't worry, timestamps are waiting for you when you return. All right, let's continue. And as always, stay curious, stay calm. Now a hunter stands still not because movement would fail, but because sound would. The air is calm, leaves barely stir. Somewhere beyond sight an animal pauses, alert not to shapes or colours, but to vibration itself. In such a world, strength matters less than restraint, speed matters less than timing, and silence is not absence. It is a condition that must be maintained, protected, and worked within. Why would a hunter need a weapon that makes almost no sound? Because the landscape itself has begun to listen. During the late Pleistocene, large parts of the inhabited world were neither dense forest nor open plain, but something in between. Open woodlands, forest edges, mosaic environments shaped by shifting climates, grazing animals and fire regimes. These landscapes were visually open enough to allow distance, yet acoustically complex enough to carry sound unpredictably. Paleoclimate evidence from pollen records, lake cores, and faunal assemblages suggests fluctuating tree cover and seasonal vegetation changes across Africa, Western Eurasia, and parts of East Asia during this period. Such environments do not reward sudden movement, they punish it. Sound travels irregularly through scattered trunks and low brush. A snapped twig can echo. A rushed step can ripple outward in ways the human ear does not anticipate. In these places, silence becomes a form of camouflage. Prey species living in these ecologies were not passive recipients of human ingenuity. Many ungulates, small mammals, and birds exhibit heightened sensitivity to low-frequency vibrations and abrupt acoustic changes. Ethological studies of modern analog species show that hearing and vibration detection often precede visual confirmation. Animals lift their heads not when they see movement, but when they sense disturbance in the ground or air. We cannot project modern behaviour backward without caution, but the continuity of sensory systems across mammalian lineages suggests similar pressures were at play tens of thousands of years ago. In such contexts, a loud approach does not merely fail, it teaches the prey to anticipate human presence. Wind complicates this further. In open woodland, air currents break and reform constantly. Gusts funnel through gaps, carry scent and amplify sound. Paleoclimate reconstructions indicate that many late Pleistocene regions experience seasonal winds shaped by temperature gradients between open ground and shaded forest. A shout does not travel in a straight line here. It fractures. Rustling foliage creates false signals. A running group generates a wave of disturbance that spreads faster than bodies can move. Even coordinated ambush becomes difficult when sound outruns strategy. These environmental pressures place clear limits on earlier hunting methods. Shouting to drive animals toward traps requires predictable terrain and group coordination. Rushing depends on speed and proximity. Close-range confrontation demands either overwhelming force or high-risk tolerance. In open woodland, these approaches are costly. Injury risk rises, energy expenditure increases, failure becomes common. Archaeological assemblages from such environments often show selective hunting patterns, suggesting careful choice rather than mass pursuit. The landscape itself filters which strategies are viable. Silence, then, is not simply the absence of noise. It is an active condition shaped by environment. It demands tools and behaviours that do not disrupt the acoustic balance of the surroundings. The buff fits into this niche not as a superior weapon, but as a compatible one. Its advantage is not power alone, but discretion. A drawn bow does not announce itself. An arrow release produces minimal sound compared to a thrown spear or a charging group. The disturbance arrives with the impact, not before. By the time the prey registers danger, the sequence is already complete. Archaeology does not preserve silence, it preserves outcomes. But those outcomes carry subtle signals. In regions associated with open woodland ecologies, faunal remains sometimes show patterns consistent with solitary or small group hunting rather than large-scale drives. Kill sites suggest precision rather than chaos. The distribution of wounds indicates targeted strikes. These interpretations remain cautious. We do not assign causation lightly, but when combined with environmental reconstructions, they suggest a selective pressure favouring methods that minimise disturbance. Remaining unseen and unheard has evolutionary value beyond the hunt itself. Reduced injury risk increases survival. Lower energy expenditure preserves calories. Success without confrontation reshapes behaviour. A hunter who does not need to rush can wait. A group that does not need to shout can separate. Over time, these advantages accumulate. Selection does not reward aggression in such landscapes. It rewards patience. It rewards the ability to remain still when every instinct urges motion. The bow, in this light, is not an expression of dominance over prey. It is an accommodation to place. It emerges where the environment favours quiet solutions, where the ground listens, where the air carries memory of disturbance. The weapon adapts to the world, not the other way around. This reframing matters because it removes the bow from narratives of escalation and places it within a dialogue between humans and landscape. We do not know exactly how often early bows were used, or in which regions they first became common. Preservation biases obscure the picture, but the logic of silence aligns with what we know of late Pleistocene ecologies. Tools that minimise acoustic signature are favoured where sound travels unpredictably and prey responds quickly. This is not speculation. It is inference grounded in environmental constraint. Seen this way, the bow is less a breakthrough of violence and more a refinement of listening. It requires the hunter to read wind, foliage, and ground. To move only when movement will not be heard. To act at a distance not out of fear, but out of respect for how the landscape behaves. Aggression has little place here. The successful hunter is the one who blends into the environment so thoroughly that nothing seems to happen until it is already over. The landscape, then, shapes technology as much as technology shapes behaviour. In quiet places, loud tools fail. In listening worlds, silence becomes valuable. The bow emerges not from aggression, but from restraint shaped by landscape. Silence, however, only matters once the mind begins to plan beyond the moment. A hunter does not look at where an animal is, but at where it will be. The hand remains still. The body does not advance. Instead, the mind traces a path through empty air, curving forward, slightly downward, intersecting with a future position that does not yet exist. What changes when a hunter imagines not a strike, but a trajectory? For most of human prehistory, success depended on proximity. Tools worked where the body reached. A thrusting spear required closing distance. A thrown stone followed a simple, short path governed by strength and angle, but always tethered to the immediate moment. Reaction dominated. The animal moved, the human responded. Even when anticipation played a role, it was limited by range. The mental model of action was linear, bounded by the length of an arm or the arc of a quick throw. With the bow, that model breaks. The tool does not reward speed of reaction so much as accuracy of prediction. The decisive moments shift earlier into the mind before anything moves at all. The bow requires an abstract understanding that force will travel independently of the body once released. This is not trivial. Predicting a flight path means accounting for distance, gravity, resistance, and time, even if none of these concepts are named. It means understanding that an arrow will continue moving after it leaves the hand, and that its path can be adjusted before release rather than corrected after. Cognitive science suggests that such prediction relies on internal models of the world, mental simulations that run ahead of action. We do not know exactly when these models first appeared, but their necessity becomes clear with projectile systems that cannot be corrected mid-flight. Anticipation replaces reaction. The hunter must read movement patterns rather than respond to sudden change. Animals rarely move randomly. They graze, pause, turn, accelerate, hesitate. Successful use of a bow depends on recognizing these rhythms and projecting them forward. The target is not the animal's present position, but a calculated intersection between its likely movement and the arrow's future arrival. This demands attention over time rather than intensity in the moment. It rewards observation. It penalizes impatience. Archaeology does not preserve thoughts, but it preserves the consequences of thought. Over time, we see stone points that are not optimized for brute penetration at close range, but for stability and aerodynamics. Symmetry becomes more consistent. Edges are refined. Weight distribution suggests concern for balance rather than mass alone. Experimental studies have shown that such features improve accuracy and predictability in flight. These objects imply users who understood, at least implicitly, how shape influences trajectory. The knowledge is encoded in form, not in text. Spatial reasoning expands beyond arm's reach. The effective space of action grows larger than the body. Distance becomes a variable that can be worked with rather than a barrier to be crossed. This shift has cognitive implications. Navigating space at a distance requires mental rotation, estimation of scale, and an understanding of relative motion. These abilities are present in other contexts such as tool manufacture and navigation, but the bow integrates them into a single high-stakes act. Failure is visible. Success is precise. Feedback is immediate but delayed just enough to reinforce planning over impulse. There is evidence that forward projectile cognition appears earlier than the bow itself. Thrown spears and darts already require some anticipation, but their effective range limits the complexity of prediction. With increased range, small errors magnify. A slight miscalculation at close distance may still succeed. At greater distance, it fails completely. This increases selective pressure for improved mental modelling. Over generations, those who better imagine trajectories would waste fewer arrows, avoid unnecessary exposure, and secure more reliable food. These advantages accumulate quietly. The mental shift here is subtle but profound. Proximity is replaced by probability. The hunter no longer asks, "Can I reach it?" The question becomes, "Where will it be when my action arrives?" This reframing changes how uncertainty is managed. Instead of responding to what is certain and present, the hunter works with likelihoods. This does not require conscious mathematics. It requires pattern recognition and experience. It requires accepting that success is never guaranteed, only more or less probable. Such thinking likely influenced other domains. Once probability enters decision-making, patience becomes valuable. Waiting for the right moment matters more than acting quickly. The body learns to remain still while the mind remains active. This separation between physical motion and cognitive effort is a recurring theme in later human technologies, but here it appears in a raw, embodied form. The hunter stands quiet, but the mind is moving continuously, adjusting imagined paths with every subtle change in the environment. We should be careful not to romanticize this process. These were not philosophers contemplating abstractions for their own sake. They were people under pressure, balancing hunger, risk, and effort. The cognitive demands imposed by projectile systems emerged because they were useful, not because they were intellectually pleasing. But usefulness does not preclude depth. When success depends on imagining what has not yet happened, a new mode of engagement with the world begins to take shape. Comparative studies of modern hunter-gatherer archery suggest that skilled archers often describe their actions in terms of feel rather than calculation. This does not diminish the cognitive complexity involved. It highlights that such skills are embodied and practiced rather than verbalized. In prehistory, this knowledge would have been transmitted through demonstration, repetition, and correction. Children would learn by watching trajectories succeed or fail, internalizing patterns long before they could articulate them. Objects carry this history forward. A well-made arrow embodies lessons learned from countless shots. Its straightness reflects an understanding of stability. Its point angle balances penetration with flight. Its shaft length encodes knowledge about draw length and release speed. None of this requires writing. The artifact becomes a record of thought, preserved unintentionally in stone and wood. Archaeologists read these records cautiously, comparing assemblages across regions and time. When similar solutions appear independently, it suggests convergent understanding driven by shared constraints. Strategy, in this context, is not grand planning or hierarchical command. It is the quiet discipline of imagining outcomes before they occur. It begins when success depends less on strength or speed, and more on anticipating how the world will unfold after an action is taken. This is not a leap to abstraction in the modern sense. It is a gradual reorientation toward the future as a space that can be worked with. We do not know when the first hunter consciously thought in arcs. We cannot locate the moment in the ground. But the necessity of such thinking becomes unavoidable once projectile systems extend effective range and delay feedback. The bow does not force this shift alone, but it makes it visible. It selects for minds that can project forward, adjust expectations, and act based on imagined states rather than immediate stimuli. Such thinking leaves traces not in words but in objects. An archaeologist kneels in soil that has held its silence for tens of thousands of years, carefully lifting a fragment of worked stone. There is no wood, no fibre, no sinew, nothing that looks remotely like a bow. And yet the question refuses to go away. How do we know a tool existed when almost all of it disappears? Most of what humans once used is gone. This is not an exception in archaeology. It is the rule. Organic materials decay quickly in most environments. Wood rots. Tendons dry and fragment. plant fibres are consumed by bacteria and insects. Even bone, under certain conditions, dissolves or crumbles beyond recognition. The archaeological record is therefore not a mirror of past life, but a narrow window shaped by chemistry, climate, and chance. What survives is what resists time, not what mattered most. The bow belongs firmly in the category of technologies that mattered enormously and survived hardly at all. We do not know for certain when the first bow was made, because the bow itself rarely fossilizes. This absence has long complicated the study of early projectile technology. Unlike stone blades or hammerstones, which persist stubbornly in the ground, bows vanish almost entirely unless preserved by exceptional conditions such as permanent ice, extreme aridity, or anaerobic wetlands. Even in such rare cases, survival is partial and fragile. As a result, the archaeological presence of the bow must be inferred indirectly, reconstructed through traces left on other materials, and through patterns that repeat across sites and regions. The first challenge is understanding decay itself. Wood and fibre degrade at rates that depend on moisture, temperature, soil acidity, and microbial activity. Paleo-environments reconstructed from sediment cores and faunal remains suggest that many regions where early humans lived were biologically active landscapes. These are precisely the places where organic artifacts disappear fastest. A wooden bow left on the surface may vanish within years. Buried, it may last longer, but rarely long enough to cross into deep time. This means that the absence of bows in the archaeological record tells us very little about their actual prevalence. What does survive are stone components that behave differently depending on how they are used. Not all stone points are created equal. Points designed for thrusting weapons tend to be larger, thicker, and reinforced to withstand lateral stress. Points associated with high-velocity projectiles show different characteristics. They're often thinner, lighter, and more symmetrical. Their edges may display specific types of microfracture produced by rapid impact rather than slow pressure. These distinctions are subtle and must be interpreted cautiously, but when they appear consistently across multiple assemblages, they begin to suggest patterns of use incompatible with simple hand-delivered force, where patterns provide another line of evidence. Microscopic analysis of stone tools can reveal impact fractures that form only under certain conditions. Experiments conducted by archaeologists using replicated tools have shown that high-velocity impacts produce diagnostic breakage patterns, such as bending fractures with specific initiation points and termination shapes. These patterns differ from those produced by thrusting or by post-depositional damage. When such fractures appear repeatedly on points from a given assemblage, and when they coincide with environmental contexts where distance hunting would be advantageous, the case for projectile use strengthens. Still, caution is essential. High velocity can be achieved by multiple delivery systems, including spear throwers and darts. The bow is not the only technology capable of producing such effects. Archaeologists therefore avoid simple claims. They speak instead of projectile technologies broadly defined. Within this category, the bow occupies a particular niche, but distinguishing it from other systems requires converging evidence rather than a single diagnostic trait. Ethnographic parallels offer additional insight, but they are applied carefully. Studies of recent and historically documented hunter-gatherer societies show how bows are constructed, maintained and used across a wide range of environments. These observations help archaeologists understand what kinds of material traces bow use might leave behind. For example, ethnographic data demonstrate that bows often require frequent replacement of organic components, while stone points may be reused, resharpened, and eventually discarded. This helps explain why stone points accumulate archaeologically while bows do not. However, scholars are careful not to project specific cultural practices backward. Ethnography informs possibilities, not certainties. One of the most challenging aspects of studying early bow technology is the temptation to treat absence as evidence of non-existence. This is a persistent problem in interpretations of deep prehistory. The archaeological record is incomplete by nature. Entire categories of behaviour leave little or no material trace. Sound, gesture, planning, teaching, and waiting are invisible in the ground. Organic technologies are underrepresented relative to their importance. Recognizing this bias is not an admission of ignorance. It is a necessary step toward more accurate reconstruction. In some cases, indirect evidence accumulates to a point where the absence of preserved bows becomes less troubling. Sites that show a sudden proliferation of small standardized projectile points, combined with faunal assemblages indicating increased hunting efficiency and reduced injury risk, suggest the adoption of distance weapons. When these patterns appear independently in different regions, they imply convergent solutions to similar ecological pressures. The bow does not need to be found intact to be inferred as part of this technological constellation. We must also consider the temporal dimension. Technologies do not appear fully formed. Early bows were likely simple, variable, and experimental. They may have coexisted with other projectile systems for long periods. Their use may have been situational rather than universal. This variability further reduces the likelihood of direct preservation. A technology that is used occasionally, made from perishable materials and replaced frequently, is archaeologically elusive by definition. The limits of certainty in deep prehistory are not flaws to be corrected. They are conditions to be worked within. Archaeologists build knowledge incrementally, weighing probabilities and acknowledging uncertainty. Statements are framed carefully. We say that certain assemblages are consistent with bow use. We do not say they prove it beyond doubt. This disciplined restraint is what allows the field to progress without collapsing into speculation. There is also a broader lesson here about how history is recorded. What we find is not a complete inventory of past life, but a selective archive shaped by material endurance. Stone dominates our view of early technology not because it dominated daily life, but because it survives. Organic technologies, including those that transformed human behaviour most profoundly, often vanish. The bow belongs to this hidden majority. Absence in the ground does not mean absence in the past. This principle extends beyond bows. It applies to clothing, shelters, containers, musical instruments, and countless other aspects of early human life. Archaeology reconstructs these missing elements through pattern, comparison, and careful inference. The goal is not to fill gaps with imagination, but to acknowledge them honestly while extracting as much information as the evidence allows. In the case of the bow, what survives best are not the curved limbs or the stretched string, but the materials chosen to make them work. Stone points, shaped and reshaped, discarded and recovered, carry within them traces of a technological system that relied on organic components now gone. By studying these fragments with patience and humility, archaeologists glimpse a technology that once extended human intention far beyond the reach of the body. What survives best are not bows, but the materials chosen to make them work. Imagine this. Two branches are cut from the same forest. One splinters sharply when bent. The other yields, curves, and returns almost to where it began. To the untrained eye, they look similar. To someone who has learned by repetition and failure, they are entirely different materials. Why do some woods break while others remember their shape? Long before elasticity was described in equations, it was encountered in the hands. Early humans lived among materials that responded differently to force. Some resisted and failed suddenly. Others absorbed stress, bending slowly, storing effort without visible damage. This difference is not accidental. It arises from internal structure, grain orientation, moisture content, cellular arrangement. We do not know when humans first articulated these distinctions consciously, but the evidence suggests they learned them through long engagement. The bow emerges from this learning, not as a sudden insight, but as the outcome of countless small decisions about which materials could be trusted to bend. Elasticity becomes a selection criterion. This is a quiet but profound shift. Earlier tools could be made from almost any sufficiently hard stone or sturdy wood. A club works whether the branch is flexible or not. A thrusting spear tolerates stiffness. The bow does not. It demands materials that behave predictably under repeated stress. Woods that are too brittle fail catastrophically. Woods that are too soft deform permanently. Only a narrow range of species and conditions produces limbs that can bend, store energy, and recover without cracking. Recognizing this range requires attention over time. It requires watching what happens not once but repeatedly. Seasonality matters. Trees change throughout the year. Sap content rises and falls. Fibers swell and shrink. Ethnographic studies of traditional bow-making societies show careful timing in harvesting wood, often preferring specific seasons when moisture levels produce more stable results. Archaeology cannot always detect such practices directly, but paleo-environmental reconstructions indicate that ancient humans experience pronounced seasonal cycles. It is reasonable to infer that repeated failure taught them when to cut, when to dry, and when to wait. The calendar enters technology here, not as an abstract system, but as embodied knowledge tied to plant behavior. Wood alone is rarely sufficient. The bow becomes functional only when paired with other organic materials. Sinew provides tensile strength that wood lacks. Plant fibers offer flexibility and binding. Animal products contribute resilience and elasticity. Each of these materials behaves differently under tension and humidity. Combining them is not intuitive. Sinew shrinks as it dries, increasing tension. Fibers twist and loosen. Adhesives fail if applied too thickly or too thinly. These interactions require experimentation. We do not know how many failed bows were discarded before reliable combinations emerged. What we do know is that success implies sustained trial and error across generations. This long experimentation leaves faint traces. In later archaeological contexts where organic preservation is exceptional, such as high-altitude ice patches or waterlogged sites, we find composite tools that reflect deep material knowledge. Bindings are carefully placed. Backing layers compensate for wood weakness. Repairs indicate ongoing maintenance rather than replacement. These examples come much later than the earliest inferred bows, but they demonstrate what mature bow technology looks like. They help archaeologists reason backward, understanding that even early versions would have required similar principles, albeit applied more crudely. Craft knowledge of this kind does not lend itself to verbal instruction alone. It is transmitted through demonstration and correction. A novice learns by feeling when a branch resists too sharply, by hearing the subtle sounds of fibre strain, by watching a mentor discard a piece without explanation. This kind of learning leaves no manuscripts. It leaves traditions. Variability in bow design across regions suggests localized material solutions rather than a single origin. Different woods, different fibers, different climates. The bow is not one invention replicated everywhere. It is a family of solutions converging on the same mechanical principle. The cognitive implications are significant. Selecting materials based on their future behaviour requires imagining how they will respond under conditions not yet present. A branch cut today must perform months later. Sinew prepared now will be stressed repeatedly in the future. This forward-looking evaluation reinforces the temporal thinking introduced earlier. The material itself becomes a participant in planning. Failure is delayed, success is provisional. The maker learns to think in longer arcs, not only of force but of time. Archaeologically, this convergence of material wisdom appears indirectly. We see increasing standardization in point sizes that correspond to predictable draw weights. We observe repair patterns that suggest reuse rather than disposal. We find evidence of curated toolkits, where components are maintained over long periods. These patterns imply investment. They imply that the tool was worth sustaining. Such investment only makes sense when materials behave reliably. Reliability comes from knowledge accumulated slowly. It is tempting to describe the bow as an invention, a moment of insight. The evidence does not support this. What we see instead is convergence. Different groups facing similar constraints arrive at similar solutions by learning which materials bend and which break. This process does not require communication between distant communities. It arises naturally from engagement with the same physical laws. Elasticity does not care who discovers it. It rewards those who respect it. There is a humility embedded in this process. The bow maker must accept the limits of material. Force cannot be imposed arbitrarily. It must be negotiated. Wood has memory, fibre has preference. Sinew responds according to its own rules. The successful tool emerges when human intention aligns with these properties rather than attempting to overpower them. This alignment is not ideological, it is practical, it is learned through patience. The bow, then, is not a singular breakthrough. It is the product of many small recognitions layered over time. A branch that failed, a fibre that held, a season that worked better than another. Knowledge accumulates quietly, carried by hands rather than words. By the time a reliable bow exists, it embodies generations of observation condensed into form. Selecting materials is only the beginning. Shaping them requires patience. A hunter shaping a tool in a season when no hunt is possible. The ground may be frozen or soaked. Game may be distant or scarce. Nothing waits nearby to be struck, and yet the work continues. Wood is selected and set aside. Fibres are prepared and stretched. Time is invested long before any animal appears. What kind of hunter works long before the animal appears? For most of human prehistory, effort was closely tied to reward. You hunted when hungry. You gathered when food was available. Tools were repaired when they broke, sharpened when dull, discarded when lost. Preparation existed, but it was bounded by immediacy. The bow disrupts this rhythm. It introduces tasks whose payoff is separated from their labour by weeks, months, sometimes longer. A bow cannot be made quickly. Even the simplest forms require drying, curing, and repeated adjustment. Wood cut too recently twists or cracks. Sinew applied too early shrinks unpredictably. Adhesives fail if moisture remains. The process resists haste. Archaeological evidence suggests that once bow technology begins to mature, investment time increases significantly. This is inferred not from preserved bows, but from the patterns that accompany them. Stone points become curated rather than disposable. Repair and resharpening traces increase. Assemblages show continuity rather than constant replacement. These patterns imply that the tools they belong to were worth waiting for. Such waiting only makes sense when preparation improves future success more reliably than immediate action. Failure is an unavoidable part of this process. Bow-making involves loss. Branches split during drying, limbs fail under tension, fibers snap, adhesives delaminate. Each failure represents time spent with no return. In immediate return economies, such losses are dangerous. They consume resources without feeding anyone. The adoption of bow technology therefore implies a shift not only in individual behaviour, but in social tolerance. Groups must absorb the cost of delayed payoff. They must allow some members to work without immediate contribution, trusting that future returns will compensate. Planning cycles expand across seasons. Materials are gathered when they are best, not when they are needed. Wood may be cut at one time of year, shaped later, finished later still. Sinew may be prepared during periods of abundance to be used months afterward. This creates temporal layering in daily life. Tasks are no longer synchronized with immediate need. They are scheduled according to environmental rhythms. The year itself becomes a framework for technological planning. Paleo-environmental data show that many regions inhabited by early bow using populations experience strong seasonal variation. Temperature, humidity, and resource availability fluctuated predictably. These cycles would have structured not only subsistence, but production. Archaeologists see this in the timing of site occupations and in the presence of seasonally available materials far from their source. While we cannot observe bow-making directly, the broader pattern suggests communities increasingly comfortable with delayed returns and long preparation. Deferred payoff becomes a survival strategy. This is a subtle but important distinction. The bow does not simply allow hunting at a distance. It requires patience long before hunting begins. A hunter who invests in preparation may go weeks without visible benefit. The payoff arrives later, sometimes unexpectedly, when a well-made tool performs reliably under pressure. Over time, this strategy reduces risk. Fewer failed hunts, fewer injuries, more predictable outcomes. But these benefits only emerge if preparation is tolerated and valued. This tolerance reshapes social dynamics. In groups where immediate contribution is the norm, prolonged preparation could be seen as inefficiency or indulgence. The persistence of bow technology implies that such judgment shifted. Time spent preparing tools became socially legible as valuable work. This does not require formal recognition or hierarchy. It requires shared understanding that some forms of labour operate on longer timelines. Children may watch elders shape wood without seeing immediate results. Over time, they learn that not all useful actions produce instant outcomes. The bow also introduces asymmetry in effort. One person may spend weeks making a tool that others later use, or knowledge may be concentrated among a few skilled individuals. Archaeological evidence for specialization remains debated in deep prehistory, but variability in craftsmanship suggests differences in experience and aptitude. When preparation time is long, skill matters more. Failure is costly, success is rewarded. This creates incentives for learning and teaching that extend beyond the moment. We do not know how early communities negotiated these dynamics. There are no manuscripts, no explicit records, but we can observe the consequences. Increased standardization implies shared expectations. Repair patterns suggest long-term ownership. Transport of finished tools across landscapes indicates foresight. All of this points to a reorganization of time at the scale of daily life. The bow reshapes not only how force is delivered, but when work is done. The psychological implications are quiet but far-reaching. Working without immediate reward requires confidence in the future. It requires trust that conditions will remain favourable enough for the tool to be used. It requires acceptance that effort today may benefit someone else tomorrow. These attitudes are not abstract beliefs, they are habits reinforced through experience. When preparation pays off, patience is learned. When it fails, adjustments are made. Over generations, these patterns stabilize. This reorganization of time does not replace immediacy. Hunting and gathering remain responsive to present conditions, but alongside them emerges a parallel track of long-term investment. Life becomes layered. Some actions address current needs, others prepare for uncertain futures. The bow integrates these layers. It demands attention now for benefit later. It rewards those who can hold both timelines at once. Archaeologists sometimes speak of technological commitment. The bow exemplifies this concept. Once a group commits to a technology that requires long preparation, abandoning it becomes costly. Knowledge must be maintained. Materials must be sourced. Skills must be passed on. This creates continuity. Even if alternative tools exist, the investment already made encourages persistence. Over time, this persistence deepens expertise and further improves outcomes. We should resist the temptation to frame this as progress. It is adaptation. In some environments, immediate return strategies remain optimal. In others, delayed payoff offers advantages. The bow flourishes where the balance favours preparation. Its spread is uneven. Its adoption is contingent. But where it takes hold, it leaves a distinctive imprint on how time is experienced. The bow reshapes time not only in use, but in life itself. Days include work whose value is not immediately visible. Seasons are anticipated. Futures are prepared for. This does not require language about the future. It requires only repeated experience of delay rewarded. Over generations, this experience becomes normal. Such investment reshapes how knowledge moves between people. This temporal shift has another consequence that is easy to miss if we focus only on efficiency. Preparation creates pauses in which observation deepens. When a hunter is not moving through the landscape in pursuit of food, time opens for watching weather patterns, animal paths, and seasonal changes without urgency. These periods of waiting are not empty. They are saturated with information. Archaeological interpretations of long-term site use suggest that some locations served not only as hunting bases, but as places of repair, preparation, and learning. The bow fits naturally into such spaces. Its making encourages stillness, and stillness sharpens perception. Extended preparation also alters how mistakes are understood. In immediate return systems, failure is often attributed to chance or circumstance. A missed throw can be blamed on sudden movement or poor timing. With long preparation, failure invites analysis. If a bow limb fails weeks after it was shaped, the cause must be traced backward. Was the wood cut too early? Was it dried too fast? Was the backing applied unevenly? This backward reasoning reinforces causal thinking across time. Effects are no longer tied only to recent actions. They are linked to decisions made long ago. Over repeated cycles, this strengthens an understanding of delayed consequence that extends beyond tools. There is also a social dimension to visible waiting. A bow in the process of curing is a public object. It signals future intent. Others see that a hunt is being prepared for, even if not today. This visibility can coordinate group behaviour subtly, without instruction. People adjust their expectations. They may allocate tasks differently, knowing that future capacity is being built. Archaeologists studying cooperative labour in foraging societies note that such signalling can stabilise group effort without formal hierarchy. The bow, by existing unfinished in shared space, becomes part of this quiet coordination. Preparation time can also protect knowledge. Skills that take weeks to complete cannot be easily copied by outsiders or novices. This does not imply secrecy, but it does create thresholds. To understand the full process, one must remain within the community long enough to witness its stages. This reinforces continuity across generations. Elders who remember earlier failures become valuable not because of authority, but because of experience stretched across time. Their knowledge is proven by patience rather than display. The extended timeline of bow making may even influence how people think about aging and learning. Skills that mature slowly reward long lives. They make accumulated experience useful rather than redundant. In such systems, older individuals contribute not by speed or strength, but by judgment shaped through repetition. This aligns with archaeological evidence suggesting that many foraging societies supported individuals beyond peak physical performance. The bow does not cause this shift alone, but it fits within a broader pattern where time invested in knowledge yields returns later in life. None of this requires abstract planning language or explicit future narratives. It emerges through practice. A child sees a tool take shape over weeks. They learn that usefulness can be delayed, that effort can precede need. Over time, this becomes ordinary. The future stops being an abstract unknown and becomes something partially prepared for through routine action. In this way, the bow quietly stretches human attention forward, not dramatically, not symbolically, but practically. It teaches that some of the most important work happens long before it matters. A bow rests in the hands of someone who has never drawn one before. They have watched others do it many times. They know the sequence: lift, pull, release. Nothing about the motion seems hidden, and yet when they try, the bow resists them. The string trembles. The arrow refuses to go where the eyes are aimed. What changes when knowledge cannot be copied by sight alone? Why can't a bow be learned simply by watching once? Many prehistoric skills are legible at a glance. A stone scraper shows how it meets a hide. A pounding stone reveals its purpose through wear. Even complex tools often disclose their logic visually. The bow does not. Its effectiveness depends on relationships between force, balance, and timing that are invisible until they fail. Watching someone draw and release a bow shows the outline of the act, but conceals the work happening inside the body. The tension is internal. The corrections are subtle. The difference between success and failure lies in movements too small to see and sensations that cannot be observed from the outside. The bow therefore demands guided learning. This is not a cultural preference. It is a physical requirement imposed by the tool itself. Drawing a bow involves coordinating multiple muscle groups under increasing load. The shoulders must remain stable, while the arms move asymmetrically. The wrist must align without collapsing. The fingers must release without adding sideways force. Each of these actions interacts with the others. A small error in one place magnifies downstream. The body must learn to feel when the system is balanced and when it is not. This learning depends on feedback that only the user experiences directly. Tension speaks through the muscles. Vibration travels through bone. The bow pushes back against the body in ways that differ depending on material, humidity, and construction. These sensations cannot be described easily, even in language-rich cultures. In prehistory, they would have been learned through correction and repetition rather than explanation. Someone experienced would intervene not with abstract instruction, but by adjusting posture, guiding the hands, or stopping the attempt before failure. Error correction becomes structured. A missed shot is not treated as bad luck, it is diagnosed. The bow arm was unstable, the release was uneven, the draw length changed mid-pull. Each error has a cause that can be identified and addressed. Over time, learners internalize these corrections. The body anticipates failure and adjusts before it occurs. This process takes repeated practice under supervision. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be inferred fully from observation. Archaeological traces of such learning are indirect, but they exist. One of the most telling is standardization. Projectile points associated with bow use often fall within narrow size and weight ranges. This consistency suggests shared technique. It implies that learners were trained to produce and use tools within accepted parameters. Variation still exists, but it clusters rather than spreading randomly. Such patterning is difficult to explain without some form of instruction shaping behavior over time. We also see evidence in repair and reuse. Points are resharpened in consistent ways. Shafts are replaced while heads are retained. These practices imply familiarity with how the system fails and how it can be restored. A novice discards what they do not understand. An expert repairs. The presence of curated components in archaeological assemblages suggests users who knew not only how to shoot, but how to maintain performance. This knowledge is acquired gradually through guided experience. The rise of instruction follows naturally. When a tool can injure its user or others through misuse, learning becomes a matter of safety as well as efficiency. A poorly released arrow does not simply miss. It can shatter, rebound, or strike unpredictably. Communities relying on bows cannot afford uncontrolled experimentation. They must regulate who practices, when, and how. This regulation does not require formal rules. It can occur through quiet oversight, encouragement, and correction. But it does require experienced individuals willing to invest time in teaching. Mentorship emerges from this necessity. Those who have mastered the bow become responsible for guiding others. Their authority is practical, not imposed. It rests on demonstrated reliability. Archaeologically, this kind of authority leaves no direct trace, but its effects do. Skill levels vary within assemblages. Some points show expert craftsmanship, others are cruder. This variation suggests learning trajectories rather than uniform competence. Not everyone reaches the same level. Some stop early, others continue refining their skill. This differentiation has social consequences. Expertise becomes valuable. A skilled archer contributes more reliably to group survival. Over time, such individuals may be given greater responsibility or trust. This is not hierarchy in the political sense. It is recognition grounded in performance. Teaching reinforces this dynamic. The ability to instruct others becomes as important as the ability to perform. Knowledge transmission stabilizes when experts are also mentors. The bow also changes how children learn. Skills that cannot be imitated require longer apprenticeships. A child may watch for years before being allowed to draw a full-weight bow. Practice may begin with lighter tools or partial actions. This staged learning aligns with evidence from human development, suggesting prolonged childhood and extended periods of dependency. The bow does not create this pattern, but it fits within it, reinforcing the value of slow learning. Comparative studies of traditional archery in recent societies show similar dynamics. Mastery is achieved through repeated guided practice. Instruction often focuses on feel rather than verbal explanation. Teachers correct posture and timing physically. Learners internalize standards through repetition. While we cannot project these practices directly into deep prehistory, they demonstrate the kinds of learning processes required by the technology. Physics has not changed. The bow still behaves the same way. There's also an emotional dimension. Learning under guidance requires humility. The learner must accept correction. The teacher must exercise patience. These dispositions are not automatic. They are cultivated through shared goals and mutual dependence. When success benefits the group, investment in learning becomes worthwhile. Over time, this reinforces cooperative norms. Knowledge is not hoarded, it is transmitted because survival depends on it. The bow punishes mistakes in ways that are memorable. A snapped string, a failed shot, a bruised arm leaves an impression. These experiences motivate careful learning. They discourage reckless imitation. They encourage respect for the tool. Over generations, such respect becomes embedded in practice. The bow is approached deliberately. Training is taken seriously. These attitudes do not need to be articulated. They are enacted. Archaeologists sometimes speak of high-fidelity transmission. This refers to the accurate passing of skills across generations. Tools that require instruction tend to produce higher fidelity transmission because errors are costly and obvious. The bow fits this category. Its performance reveals whether learning has occurred. Success is measurable. Failure is instructive. This creates a feedback loop that stabilizes technique over time. We do not know the words that were spoken during early instruction, or if words were used at all. We do not know the gestures, the rhythms of practice, the moments of frustration and correction. But we can infer the necessity of teaching from the demands of the tool. The bow does not tolerate ignorance. It demands knowledge embodied through practice. That demand reshapes how communities invest in learning. Teaching becomes essential when tools punish mistakes. Skill, once learned, changes how risk itself is managed. A hunter stands still while danger remains elsewhere. The animal does not yet know it is being watched. The human body is no longer pressed into the same space as hooves, horns, teeth, or sudden panic. The moment of risk has been stretched, thinned, pushed outward into distance. What happens when danger is no longer close? For most of human history, hunting placed the body in immediate proximity to harm. Thrusting weapons required closing the gap. A wounded animal could charge. A misstep could end a life. Skeletal evidence from earlier periods shows fractures, puncture wounds, and healed injuries consistent with close encounters. We do not know the stories behind these bones, but the patterns suggest frequent bodily risk. The bow alters this equation. It does not remove danger entirely, but it redistributes it. Threat moves outward, away from the body into space that can be measured, assessed, and managed. The reduction of close-quarters injury is one of the quiet advantages of distance weapons. Faunal assemblages associated with projectile hunting often show cleaner kill signatures and fewer signs of prolonged struggle. This does not imply ease or abundance. It implies control. Distance allows the hunter to act without immediately triggering the animal's defensive response. Even when a hunt fails, the human is less exposed. Over time, this reduces cumulative injury risk. Survival becomes less about enduring harm and more about avoiding it. This shift influences prey selection. Animals that were once too dangerous to approach closely become more viable targets. Conversely, prey that require cooperative ambush may become less attractive when solitary hunting at distance is effective. Archaeological patterns suggest changes in hunted species composition, in some regions following the adoption of advanced projectile systems. We must be cautious here. Many factors shape prey choice, including climate and population pressure. But distance expands the menu of possibility. It allows hunters to consider not only what they can overpower, but what they can outmaneuver. Solitary versus cooperative hunting strategies also shift. Close-range hunts often benefit from group coordination. Driving, surrounding, and confronting prey requires multiple bodies acting together. Distance weapons make solo hunting more feasible in certain contexts. One individual can observe, wait, and act without alerting others. This does not eliminate cooperative hunting, but it diversifies strategies. Flexibility increases. Groups are no longer locked into a single mode of engagement. This adaptability matters in variable environments. The psychological effects of distance are subtle, but significant. Facing danger directly demands courage, but it also induces stress. Prolonged exposure to high-risk environments shapes behavior, attention, and decision-making. Distance moderates these pressures. The hunter can observe calmly. Heart rate slows. Choices become less reactive. This does not mean fear disappears. It means fear can be managed. The mind has space to evaluate rather than simply respond. This space changes how effort and reward are calculated. A close-range hunt may promise immediate payoff but carries high risk. A distance hunt may require patience, preparation, and repeated attempts, but reduces the chance of injury. Over time, selection favors strategies that balance energy expenditure against survival probability. The bow fits into this balance. It demands more preparation and skill, but it pays off through reduced bodily cost. Survival begins to favor foresight over bravery. Archaeological evidence hints at this recalibration. Sites associated with projectile use often show longer occupation spans and repeated use, suggesting stability rather than constant relocation driven by injury or failure. Toolkits become lighter and more portable, consistent with strategies that emphasize mobility and avoidance rather than confrontation. These patterns are not uniform, but they appear often enough to suggest a broader trend. Distance reshapes not only individual hunts, but how groups move through landscapes. This does not mean bravery vanishes from human life. It means bravery changes form. Courage becomes the willingness to wait, to resist impulse, to trust preparation. The hunter who holds position rather than charging demonstrates a different kind of strength. This strength is quieter. It is harder to see archaeologically, but it leaves traces in outcomes. Fewer broken bones, more predictable returns, longer lifespans. Distance also affects learning and decision-making. When danger is immediate, mistakes are punished instantly. When danger is distant, errors can be corrected without catastrophic consequence. A missed shot does not usually injure the shooter, it instructs them. This learning environment encourages experimentation within safe bounds. Over time, this accelerates skill development. It allows refinement without constant threat. The bow thus creates a feedback loop where reduced risk enables better learning, which further reduces risk. We should resist the temptation to view this as moral progress. It is adaptation. In some environments, close-range hunting remains effective and necessary. In others, distance offers clear advantages. The bow spreads unevenly because its benefits depend on context. Where it fits, it reshapes how humans relate to danger. The body is no longer the primary site of confrontation. Space becomes a buffer. This buffering has social implications. Individuals who survive longer contribute more knowledge. Elders carry experience forward. Communities benefit from accumulated learning rather than constant replacement. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence suggests that societies with reduced injury rates often exhibit richer knowledge transmission. The bow is not the sole cause of this, but it participates in the pattern by lowering the physical toll of subsistence. Distance also alters the emotional texture of the hunt. The moment of killing is less chaotic. It may feel more detached. We cannot access the inner lives of early hunters, but we can infer that sensory intensity changes when contact is delayed. This may affect memory, teaching, and storytelling. The hunt becomes something that can be discussed rather than merely survived. Knowledge can be abstracted and shared. As distance becomes established, new pressures emerge. Hitting from afar demands accuracy. Small errors matter more when the margin for correction disappears. The safety gained through distance must be balanced against the demand for precision. Tools, bodies and minds must align more closely. The bow does not end risk. It transforms it. Survival begins to favour foresight over bravery. With distance established, precision becomes the next pressure. This shift toward distance also alters the rhythm of movement across the landscape. When close contact is no longer required, hunters can choose positions rather than pursue relentlessly. Elevated ground, forest margins and wind-favoured corridors gain importance. Archaeological surveys show repeated use of specific vantage points and pathways, suggesting that places were selected not only for access to prey, but for the ability to maintain separation. Distance allows choice. The hunt becomes less about chase and more about positioning. There are demographic consequences to this change. Fewer injuries mean fewer interruptions to daily life. A hunter who avoids broken bones or puncture wounds can continue contributing, rather than becoming dependent. Over long spans of time, this stability compounds. Groups with lower injury rates can support children longer, retain experienced adults, and recover more quickly from environmental stress. These effects are difficult to isolate archaeologically, but population models suggest that even small reductions in adult mortality can have outsized impacts on group continuity. Distance also influences how tools are carried and maintained. A bow and arrows are portable insurance. They travel with the hunter, ready but unused most of the time. This encourages lighter toolkits and flexible movement. Archaeological assemblages associated with advanced projectile use often show fewer heavy implements and greater emphasis on maintainable components. The bow does not demand constant engagement. It waits. This waiting changes how people move through space, allowing for scouting, retreat and reassessment without immediate cost. There's an emotional dimension to this separation as well. Distance moderates the sensory intensity of the hunt. The sounds are softer. The physical exertion is less explosive. This may reduce panic and increase deliberation. We cannot access subjective experience directly, but we can infer that reduced sensory overload makes reflection possible. A hunt that unfolds slowly allows decisions to be reconsidered. The hunter can stop, wait, and choose not to act. This option did not exist when danger and opportunity were intertwined. Distance also creates room for refusal. Not every encounter must become a confrontation. A hunter can observe and decide that conditions are not favourable. Wind shifts, light fades. The prey moves unpredictably. The bow allows disengagement without loss of face or safety. Over time, this discretion likely improves efficiency. Energy is conserved. Effort is directed where probability is higher. Survival favours those who choose carefully rather than those who act immediately. This recalibration affects social expectations. When danger is distant, success is less visible. There is no dramatic clash to witness. Outcomes are quieter. This may shift how skill is recognised and valued. Accuracy, judgment and restraint become markers of competence. These qualities are harder to display but easier to trust once established. Communities may come to rely on individuals known for making few mistakes rather than those known for bold action. The bow thus participates in a broader transformation of risk management. Risk is not eliminated. It is redistributed. It moves from the body to the decision. Errors more likely to result in lost opportunity than injury. This changes learning environments, as earlier noted, but it also changes emotional responses to failure. Missing a shot is disappointing, not catastrophic. This encourages persistence. Practice becomes safer. Improvement becomes more likely. As these patterns settle, the meaning of courage shifts further. Courage becomes the willingness to wait, to hold back, to accept uncertainty without rushing to resolve it. This is not a moral lesson imposed from outside. It is a behavioral adaptation reinforced by outcomes. Those who wait survive more often. Those who charge less so. Distance creates safety, but it also creates new demands. Once separation is possible, accuracy determines success. Small misjudgments matter more. The margin for error narrows. Tools must be refined. Bodies must be trained. Minds must calculate more precisely. With distance established, precision becomes the next pressure. An arrow lies on the ground, broken not at the tip, not at the tail, but somewhere in between. It is useless as it is, and yet nothing essential has been lost. The point can be recovered, the shaft can be replaced, the bindings can be retied. The arrow does not end here. When does a weapon stop being a thing and start being a system? Most early tools are singular objects. A hand axe breaks, and it is gone. A spear snaps, and the work must begin again from the beginning. The arrow is different. It arrives not as a unified whole, but as an assembly of parts designed to work together and to fail independently. This is its quiet innovation. The arrow introduces modular design into human technology. It is not simply thrown or released. It is maintained, repaired, reconfigured. An arrow consists of multiple components, each with its own material logic. The shaft must be straight, flexible enough to absorb acceleration, but rigid enough to maintain trajectory. The point must be sharp and durable, designed to penetrate without shattering. Bindings must hold under sudden stress yet remain adjustable. Fletching must stabilize flight by interacting with air rather than resisting it. None of these elements is optional. Each performs a distinct function. The arrow only works because these functions are separated and coordinated. This separation matters. It allows failure to be localized. A broken shaft does not require a new point. A dulled point does not require a new shaft. Bindings can be retied. Fletching can be replaced. Archaeologically, this logic appears in patterns of reuse. Stone points show extensive resharpening and rehafting. Shafts are replaced more often than points. Bindings leave traces of repeated adjustment. These patterns suggest that arrows were not treated as disposable objects, but as systems maintained over time. Standardization follows naturally. For modular systems to work efficiently, parts must be compatible. Shafts must accept points of similar size. Bindings must fit predictable dimensions. Fletching must be placed consistently to stabilize flight. Archaeological assemblages associated with advanced projectile technology often show clustering in point size and form. This is not aesthetic preference. It is functional necessity. Interchangeability reduces downtime. It allows repair in the field. It supports preparation before need. Maintenance becomes routine behavior. The arrow is checked, adjusted, repaired. This work happens away from the hunt, often in quiet moments. Archaeologists find evidence of this in wear patterns that indicate repeated removal and replacement of components. These traces suggest familiarity. The user knows where failure is likely and intervenes before it occurs. This anticipatory maintenance reflects a new relationship with tools. They are no longer used until they fail. They are cared for to prevent failure. This shift has social implications. Modular systems encourage specialization. One person may be particularly skilled at shaping points. Another may excel at preparing shafts. Another may handle bindings or fletching. We do not know the exact division of labour, but archaeological evidence shows variability in craftsmanship that suggests differential expertise. The arrow allows these skills to coexist without requiring everyone to master every step. Knowledge becomes distributed across the group. Material specialization follows environment. Different regions offer different resources. Stone types vary. Woods vary. Fibers vary. The modular arrow system accommodates this diversity. A shaft made from local wood can accept a point made from distant stone. Bindings can be adapted to available materials. This flexibility supports mobility and exchange. Archaeologists find non-local stone points far from their sources, suggesting movement of components rather than whole tools. The arrow system travels in parts. The cognitive implications are significant. Modular thinking requires understanding not just objects, but relationships between parts. The maker must anticipate how components will interact under stress. They must design for replacement. This is not abstract engineering in the modern sense, but it reflects the same principle. The whole is conceived as a system whose performance depends on the alignment of its parts. This way of thinking does not arise suddenly. It emerges through repeated engagement with repair and failure. We see hints of this mindset in the archaeological record. Assemblages show increasing evidence of curated toolkits rather than opportunistic use. Components are carried forward even when temporarily unusable. Points are transported without shafts. Bindings are prepared in advance. These behaviours suggest anticipation. The user expects future need and prepares accordingly. The arrow becomes part of a broader logistical system rather than a single moment of action. This modularity also changes how loss is experienced. Losing an arrow is not catastrophic if components can be replaced. This reduces risk. It encourages use in uncertain situations. It supports experimentation. The cost of failure decreases, making learning safer. Over time, this accelerates refinement. Systems improve faster than singular objects because their parts can be adjusted independently. There is also a memory component. Modular systems require remembering which parts work together. A point fits this shaft. This binding holds under this tension. This fletching stabilizes at this draw weight. These associations must be stored mentally and socially. Knowledge becomes more detailed. Teaching must address not just how to use the arrow, but how to maintain and assemble it. The system extends beyond the physical object into practice. Archaeological signals of this thinking include caching behaviour, sets of points stored together, shafts prepared in advance, components kept separate but associated. Such caches suggest planning beyond immediate use. They imply an understanding that the system will be needed again, and that its components must be ready. This readiness reflects a shift in how time and resources are managed. The arrow system also changes how failure is interpreted. When a shot fails, the cause can be isolated. Was the point damaged? Was the shaft warped? Was the fletching misaligned? This diagnostic approach reinforces analytical thinking. Problems are broken down into parts. Solutions are targeted. Over time, this habit extends beyond tools. It shapes how challenges are approached more generally. We should not overstate this. Modular thinking in arrows does not automatically lead to complex machinery, but it establishes a precedent. It shows that systems can be built from parts and maintained over time. This principle will reappear in many later technologies, but here it arrives quietly, embedded in hunting practice rather than explicit design. The arrow, then, is more than a projectile. It is a network of decisions. Each component carries knowledge. Each repair reinforces understanding. Complexity enters not through sudden invention, but through accumulation. piece by piece, system by system. This complexity demands organization. Parts must be stored. Knowledge must be remembered. Future needs must be anticipated. Systems require storage, memory, and anticipation of future need. This system orientation also changes how loss is perceived across a landscape. When tools are singular, loss is final. When tools are modular, loss becomes partial. An arrow that breaks in tall grass does not erase the labour invested in its making. A point recovered days later can be rejoined to a new shaft. A shaft abandoned near a kill site can be replaced without remaking the entire tool. This alters mobility. Hunters can move farther from raw material sources without catastrophic risk, confident that components can be recombined later. Archaeological distributions of points far from suitable shaftwood suggest precisely this kind of confidence. Modularity also creates thresholds of readiness. A hunter does not wait until a hunt is imminent to prepare. Components accumulate quietly. Points are shaped in advance. Shafts are straightened when time allows. Bindings are prepared and stored. This stockpiling behaviour appears in the archaeological record as caches and concentrated deposits of similar items. Such deposits are not refuse, they are reserves. They indicate a mental shift toward future contingency. The arrow system encourages anticipation not only of success, but of breakage and replacement. This anticipation changes how effort is allocated during daily life. Time spent producing components is no longer directly tied to a specific hunt. It becomes background labour integrated into other activities. Someone can shape points while others gather food. Someone else can prepare fibres during rest periods. The arrow system fits into the rhythm of communal life without demanding singular focus. This integration reduces opportunity cost. Preparation becomes habitual rather than exceptional. There's also an informational economy embedded in modular systems. Components carry signals. A point's size implies a shaft diameter. Fletching placement implies draw strength. These signals allow coordination without constant communication. A person can pick up a component and know how it fits within the system. This reduces error and speeds assembly. Over time, such signalling becomes standardized. Archaeologists detect this in tight clusters of measurements and forms that persist across sites. These clusters suggest shared conventions rather than isolated improvisation. The arrow system also supports experimentation in controlled ways. Changing one component at a time allows comparison. A different point shape can be tested without altering shaft or fletching. A new binding technique can be evaluated without reshaping the entire arrow. This incremental testing accelerates refinement. It allows innovation without wholesale risk. Failures are contained, successes are preserved. The system evolves through small adjustments rather than radical redesign. This pattern of incremental change leaves a particular archaeological signature. We see gradual shifts in point morphology rather than abrupt replacements. We see coexistence of multiple forms within the same assemblage. This diversity reflects experimentation within a stable framework. The arrow system provides continuity that buffers change. It allows new ideas to enter without destabilizing the entire technology. The social dimension deepens here. Modular systems benefit from shared memory. Someone must remember which combinations worked, which failed. This memory is distributed across people and practice. It is reinforced through repetition. Teaching incorporates not just how to assemble an arrow, but how to recognize compatibility. Over time, this shared memory becomes robust. Knowledge persists even if individuals are lost. We should be careful not to project modern engineering concepts backward too strongly. Early arrow makers were not designing systems in the abstract. They were responding to practical problems, but the outcome resembles system thinking nonetheless. the arrow becomes a network of relationships rather than a single object. This network extends into storage practices, teaching, mobility and planning. Complexity, then, does not arrive with ceremony. It seeps in through routine decisions, a broken shaft replaced, a point reused, a binding adjusted. Each choice reinforces the logic of modularity. Over generations, this logic becomes normal. Tools are expected to be maintained. Failure is expected and prepared for. The future is anticipated quietly. As systems multiply, they demand organization. Parts must be kept track of. Knowledge must be retained. Future needs must be imagined before they arise. The arrow teaches this lesson without words. Systems require storage, memory, and anticipation of future need. A hunter moves across open ground with arrows on their back, a bow resting unused in the hand. There is no animal in sight, no immediate threat, no promise that the tool will be needed today. And yet it is carried anyway. Why carry weapons you might never use? For much of human history, tools were tied closely to moments of action. You brought what you needed when you needed it. A heavy club was carried when a confrontation was expected. A spear was fashioned near the hunt and discarded when broken. Carrying unused tools imposed a cost. Weight slowed movement. Extra objects demanded attention. The bow changes this calculation. It encourages preparedness not for a specific encounter, but for possibility itself. Transporting arrows across landscapes reflects a shift in how risk is managed. The arrow is light relative to its potential value. A small bundle carried for days may never be used, but when it is, it can change outcomes dramatically. Archaeological evidence shows projectile points far from suitable shaft materials and stone sources, suggesting that arrows or their components were transported intentionally over long distances. This movement implies planning beyond immediate need. The hunter anticipates encounters that have not yet occurred. Preparedness becomes a survival advantage. In unpredictable environments, opportunity appears suddenly. An animal crosses a path briefly. A moment opens and closes. A hunter carrying a bow and arrows can act. One without them cannot. This advantage doesn't guarantee success, but it increases probability. Over time, selection favours those who prepare for chance rather than react after it passes. Weight trade-offs matter here. Carrying additional equipment consumes energy. It slows travel and increases fatigue. The bow and arrows succeed as portable foresight because they offer high return for low cost. Archaeological reconstructions of hunter toolkits suggest careful balancing of weight and utility. The bow system fits within this balance. It replaces heavier close-range weapons and reduces the need for multiple specialized tools. Planning becomes lighter, not heavier. Mobility is preserved. Hunters remain able to move quickly, adjust routes, and respond to changing conditions. The bow does not anchor people to specific sites. It travels with them. This portability aligns with archaeological patterns of increased ranging behavior in some periods, associated with advanced projectile use. Groups cover larger territories without increasing physical burden proportionally. Preparedness extends reach. Anticipation replaces reaction. A hunter no longer waits to see what the landscape presents and then scrambles to respond. Instead, they move through space already equipped for potential encounters. This anticipatory posture shapes perception. The hunter scans differently. Paths are chosen with sightlines in mind. Movement becomes quieter. Awareness extends forward. The bow encourages this shift not through instruction, but through utility. Being ready pays off. Early evidence of logistical thinking appears in these behaviors. Logistics does not require storage buildings or written plans. It begins with decisions about what to carry, where to go, and how to prepare for uncertain futures. The bow fosters this thinking by making preparation portable. A hunter carries not just a tool, but a set of options. They bring future action into the present. Archaeological hints of this thinking include the distribution of tool types across landscapes. Points appear in places with no evidence of immediate use. This suggests that tools were carried through rather than made and discarded on site. Such patterns imply foresight. The hunter expects future need and prepare accordingly. The landscape is navigated with possibilities in mind. This preparedness also affects group dynamics. Individuals who carry effective tools contribute to group safety even when not actively hunting. Their presence expands collective capacity. In uncertain environments, this shared preparedness reduces vulnerability. The group becomes more resilient not through strength, but through readiness distributed across individuals. There is a psychological dimension as well. Carrying a tool for future use requires confidence that the future matters. It reflects an expectation of continuity. The hunter assumes they will survive long enough to use what they carry. This assumption is reinforced when preparation pays off. Over time, such experiences shape outlook. The future becomes something to be equipped for rather than endured. We should avoid reading modern planning mentality into these behaviours. There were no explicit forecasts or strategies in the modern sense, but repeated practice establishes patterns. Carrying the bow becomes habitual. Preparedness becomes normal. The body learns to move with tools. The mind learns to think ahead without conscious effort. The bow thus turns planning into a physical act. It is carried, not imagined. It occupies space on the body. It reminds the hunter of possibility. This embodiment matters. Planning is no longer abstract. It is weight on the back, wood in the hand, arrows at the shoulder. As planning becomes portable, relationships change. The hunter engages prey differently. Encounters are anticipated rather than stumbled into. The balance between observation and action shifts again. With planning carried across landscapes, the relationship between hunter and prey deepens, becoming less reactive and more strategic. Planning becomes portable. As planning deepens, so does the relationship between hunter and prey. This portable planning also reshapes how memory is used. When tools travel with the body, experience accumulates along routes rather than at fixed locations. A hunter remembers where an arrow was nearly used, where wind spoiled a shot, where light fell poorly at certain hours. These memories are carried forward physically alongside the tool itself. The bow becomes a companion to experience. Each journey adds layers of knowledge that can be recalled when similar conditions arise again. Archaeological studies of repeated path use and patterned movement corridors suggest that landscapes were learned intimately over time, not as maps, but as sequences of remembered situations. Carrying future capacity also influences how scarcity is navigated. In lean periods, the presence of a bow does not create food, but it preserves readiness. A hunter who is prepared can capitalize on rare opportunity without delay. This matters most when chance is infrequent. In environments shaped by climatic instability, where prey availability fluctuates sharply, preparedness smooths uncertainty. The bow does not guarantee success, but it reduces vulnerability to timing. Survival becomes less about being in the right place at the right moment by accident, and more about being ready whenever that moment appears. This readiness subtly changes group movement decisions. Paths that once would have been avoided due to uncertainty may become viable. A valley with unpredictable prey movement becomes less risky when hunters are equipped to act quietly at distance. Archaeological models of mobility suggest that such technological buffering can expand territory without increasing population density. The bow supports exploration not by force, but by reducing the cost of the unknown. There's also an effect on restraint. Carrying a bow allows a hunter to pass by opportunities deliberately. Not every animal must be pursued. Energy can be conserved. Decisions can be deferred. This capacity for refusal is important. It allows selection not just of prey, but of timing. The hunter waits for conditions that favour success. This patience, reinforced by preparedness, further shifts survival toward foresight. Portable planning also shapes teaching indirectly. Children see adults carry tools even when unused. They learn that preparation is normal, not exceptional. The bow becomes part of daily movement rather than a special object reserved for specific moments. This normalizes future-oriented behavior. Planning is learned not through instruction, but through repetition and example. We can glimpse this shift archaeologically through the increasing separation between tool manufacture sites and use sites. Points appear far from where they were made. Components travel through multiple contexts before being employed. This circulation suggests that tools were integrated into movement itself rather than tied to single events. The future is carried forward step by step. Over time, this practice reinforces a particular relationship with uncertainty. Unknown outcomes are met with readiness rather than fear. The hunter does not control the future, but prepares to meet it. This stance is neither optimistic nor pessimistic. It is practical. It arises from a repeated experience of preparation paying off just enough to matter. The bow thus teaches a quiet lesson. The future can be approached physically. It can be shouldered, maintained, and carried. Planning is no longer only mental. It becomes embodied behavior embedded in movement. As hunters move with the bow, they move with possibility. This deepens the relationship between hunter and prey. Encounters are no longer purely reactive. They are shaped by prior knowledge, carried tools, and remembered landscapes. The prey is not merely met. It is anticipated. And anticipation, once portable, becomes a defining feature of human engagement with the world. An animal falls without ever seeing the human who released the arrow. There is no charge, no struggle at arm's length, no shared moment of panic between bodies. The hunter remains still, distant, unseen. What does it feel like to kill without being seen? For most of the deep human past, hunting was an encounter. Bodies moved toward one another, sounds collided, smell, breath and motion filled the same space. The moment of killing was loud, physical and immediate. The bow alters this experience. It stretches the final moment across distance and silence. The animal does not register the human presence until after the decisive action has already occurred. This separation does not only change mechanics, it changes perception. Reduced sensory feedback is one of the first consequences. At distance, the hunter does not feel the animal's weight, hear its breathing, or see its eyes at the moment of impact. Sound is muted. Motion is brief and often distant. The kill becomes visually smaller, acoustically quieter. We cannot know how early hunters interpreted this change emotionally, but the sensory profile of the event is undeniably altered. Less information reaches the body at once. The nervous system receives fewer immediate signals of threat and struggle. This reduction likely modulates stress and adrenaline. Close-range encounters trigger powerful physiological responses. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense. Pain and injury are possibilities. Distance softens these triggers. The hunter's body remains relatively calm. Adrenaline still rises, but within narrower bounds. This may allow greater emotional regulation. Decisions can be made without being overwhelmed by sensation. Over time, repeated experience under these conditions reshapes expectations about danger and control. The emotional tone of success also changes. Silent success replaces communal confrontation. A bow kill may occur with no witnesses. There is no collective shout, no shared surge of relief or triumph in the moment itself. The confirmation comes later, when the animal is approached. This delay alters how success is processed socially. The act becomes more internal. Achievement is felt privately before it is shared. This internalization encourages reflection. A hunter may replay the moment mentally. They consider wind, distance, timing. The focus shifts from physical exertion to mental calculation. Strategy moves inward. The hunt becomes something planned, executed and reviewed within the mind. This does not eliminate social sharing, but it changes its content. Stories may emphasize judgment rather than bravery, accuracy rather than strength. Empathy may be affected as well, though this is difficult to assess archaeologically. Distance can reduce immediate emotional resonance. Not seeing the animal's reaction at close range may soften certain responses. At the same time, anticipation and observation may deepen awareness of the animal as a moving presence within the landscape. The hunter watches longer. Studies of modern hunting suggest that distance does not necessarily reduce respect or concern for prey, but it alters how emotion is experienced and expressed. We should be cautious here. The archaeological record cannot confirm inner states. It can only suggest conditions under which those states might shift. What we can observe is a change in the structure of action. The bow encourages waiting, watching, and choosing moments carefully. These behaviors require sustained attention rather than explosive response. Over time, they cultivate patience. They reward restraint. The psychological emphasis moves away from endurance and toward judgment. Survival favors those who can manage impulse and tolerate delay. The limits of archaeological access to emotion are real. Bones and tools do not record feelings, but they do record patterns of behavior that correlate with emotional experience. Reduced injury rates, increased longevity, greater investment in planning. These outcomes suggest environments in which stress is managed differently. The bow participates in this management by changing the sensory and temporal texture of the hunt. There is also a moral neutrality to this change that is important to acknowledge. Distance does not inherently desensitize or humanize. It simply alters the conditions under which killing occurs. Different individuals and communities may have responded differently. Some may have felt relief, others discomfort. The technology does not dictate feeling. It reshapes context. Over generations, these contexts accumulate. Children grow up observing hunts that are quieter, more deliberate. They learn that success does not require physical collision. They internalize models of action based on foresight and control. These models influence not only hunting, but other forms of decision-making. The psychological effects of the bow extend beyond the hunt itself. Technology quietly reshapes experience, not just outcomes. The bow does not announce this change. It embeds it in practice. Each silent kill reinforces a new relationship between action and emotion. Each successful shot confirms that distance can be effective. Over time, this becomes normal. The body expects calm where once it expected chaos. These inner changes do not remain private. They influence how people interact, teach, and organize their lives together. These inner changes ripple outward into social life. These psychological shifts also influence how success and failure are remembered over time. A close-range hunt leaves vivid sensory traces that fade unevenly, often dominated by pain, noise, or fear. A distant hunt leaves quieter memories. The mind returns not to bodily sensation, but to decision points, where the hunters stood, when they released, what they noticed too late. Memory becomes analytical rather than visceral. This kind of recall encourages learning through review rather than avoidance. Mistakes are examined instead of suppressed. The quietness of distance also alters how responsibility is felt. When killing happens without physical struggle, the hunter is not reacting to immediate threat. The choice to act feels more deliberate. This may intensify a sense of agency. The hunter cannot attribute the outcome to chaos or necessity in the same way. The act is owned more fully as a decision made under calm conditions. We cannot know how this was framed morally, but the conditions favour reflection rather than reflex. This reflective space can deepen attentiveness to pattern. Hunters using bows must notice subtle regularities. How animals pause, how they turn, how wind shifts with terrain. These observations are made over extended periods of stillness. The mind settles into monitoring rather than rushing. Over time, this attentional mode becomes habitual. It carries into other activities. The bow trains not only the body, but the mind's tempo. Silence also changes how emotion is shared. When the decisive moment is unseen by others, storytelling becomes important. The hunt is recounted after the fact. Details are reconstructed. Emphasis shifts to explanation rather than display. This encourages narrative framing. The hunter describes why a moment was chosen, how distance was judged, what signs were read. Such narratives transmit strategy rather than spectacle. They teach listeners how to think, not how to charge. The absence of immediate communal confrontation may also reduce certain social pressures. There is less need to perform bravery publicly. Competence reveals itself through consistent outcomes rather than dramatic moments. This favours individuals who are attentive and reliable over those who are bold in bursts. Over generations, such preferences may shape group norms subtly, valuing steadiness and judgment. It is important to note that distance does not erase emotion. Anticipation can be intense. Waiting can heighten awareness. The moment before release carries its own tension, but this tension is contained. It does not overwhelm. It sharpens focus. The bow allows emotion to be channeled rather than exploded. This containment may support emotional regulation beyond hunting contexts. Archaeologically, we glimpse these changes indirectly. Increased investment in planning and maintenance suggests tolerance for delayed gratification. Reduced injury suggests fewer traumatic interruptions. Longer use of sights suggests stability. These patterns align with psychological environments where stress is managed through foresight rather than confrontation. The bow contributes to this environment by changing how action feels. There is also a cumulative effect. When generations grow up within a technological context that rewards calm decision-making, expectations adjust. Children learn that danger can be managed through distance and planning. This does not remove fear from life, but it reframes it. Fear becomes something to account for rather than something to meet head-on. Technology quietly reshapes experience not by dictating thought, but by altering conditions. The bow changes the sensory, temporal, and emotional texture of hunting. In doing so, it nudges the human mind toward reflection, anticipation, and control. These inner changes ripple outward, shaping how people teach, cooperate, and organize themselves together. Two hunters stand side by side, holding the same kind of bow, carrying arrows made from the same materials, shaped within the same tradition. One consistently strikes true, the other does not. The difference is not obvious at first glance. Their bodies are similar, their tools nearly identical, and yet their outcomes diverge. What happens when not everyone can do the same thing equally well? For much of early human technology, variation in outcome could be absorbed by collective effort. A thrusting spear gains effectiveness through numbers. A drive hunt succeeds because many bodies act together. Individual differences matter less when coordination compensates. The bow changes this balance. Accuracy is personal. Strength matters, but consistency matters more. Small differences in control, timing and judgment produce large differences in result. The technology amplifies skill. We do not know when early communities first recognized this explicitly, but the evidence suggests that bow use quickly reveals variation. Experimental archaeology shows that even with identical equipment, accuracy varies widely between users. This variability is stable over time. Some individuals improve rapidly and reach high consistency. Others plateau. The bow does not equalize effort. It differentiates it. This differentiation has social consequences. When outcomes depend strongly on individual competence, reputation emerges. A hunter known for accuracy becomes valuable. Their presence increases group success. This value does not derive from physical size or brute strength alone. It comes from demonstrated reliability. The bow shifts the basis of status subtly. Competence replaces intimidation. Skill replaces mass. Archaeologically, we glimpse this through uneven distributions of wear and repair. Some projectile points show extensive use and careful maintenance. Others appear less frequently repaired or replaced. This suggests differential use by individuals who valued and relied on their equipment. It implies that some people were entrusted repeatedly with critical tasks. Trust accumulates around performance. Emerging roles follow. Not everyone needs to hunt equally when some hunt better. Others may support through preparation, observation, or teaching. This does not create rigid hierarchy, but it introduces differentiation. Tasks align with ability. Over time, reputations stabilize. People become known for what they do well. The bow accelerates this process because its results are visible and measurable. Knowledge becomes social capital. Knowing how to tune a bow, judge distance, or correct error confers influence. This influence is not enforced, it is granted. Others seek advice, they watch more closely. Teaching becomes selective. Those who know more shape how others learn. The bow thus redistributes attention within the group. Skill attracts focus. Early hints of specialization appear here. Archaeological assemblages sometimes show clusters of particularly well-made points alongside more variable examples. This pattern suggests that some individuals consistently produced higher quality components. While we cannot assign names or roles, the variation itself is telling. Uniform societies still produce variation, but when variation aligns with function and performance, it becomes socially meaningful. We must be careful not to project later social inequality backward. There is no evidence that early bow-using societies developed wealth accumulation or rigid class structures because of this technology alone. But differentiation does not require wealth. It begins with ability. When skill produces better outcomes, it alters how people relate to one another. The bow also changes learning trajectories. Those who show early aptitude may be encouraged. They receive more instruction. They practice more. Their skill compounds. Others may disengage or focus elsewhere. This feedback loop amplifies difference over time. What begins as small variation becomes noticeable distinction. This distinction affects decision-making. A group facing risk may defer to those with proven accuracy. Choices about when to hunt, where to position, or whether to act may be influenced by who is present. Authority here is situational, not permanent. It arises in contexts where skill matters, but repeated situations reinforce patterns. There is also a moral neutrality to this process. The bow does not reward fairness, it rewards performance. Communities respond by adapting socially. They find ways to integrate difference without fragmenting. Teaching mitigates inequality by spreading knowledge. Cooperation ensures that success benefits many, but difference remains. Archaeologically, these dynamics leave subtle marks. Variability increases within toolkits. Evidence of curated equipment clusters around certain contexts. Some sites show repeated use by skilled individuals, others appear more opportunistic. These patterns suggest that not all participation was equal. Skill mattered. The bow thus introduces a quiet tension. It empowers individuals but binds them to groups that recognize and rely on that empowerment. It creates difference but also incentive to manage difference carefully. Too much inequality would threaten cohesion. Too little would waste potential. Early societies navigate this balance pragmatically. Inequality begins not with wealth, but with ability. This is not a moral claim. It is an observation about how performance shapes social structure. The bow makes this visible. It does not invent difference. It magnifies it. Over time, such differences leave marks on the archaeological record. As these differences become familiar, they begin to structure expectation. People come to anticipate who will succeed in certain situations and who will not. This anticipation shapes trust. A skilled archer is trusted not because of status granted in advance, but because past outcomes have demonstrated reliability. Trust, in this sense, is empirical. It accumulates through repeated confirmation. The bow sharpens this process by producing outcomes that are difficult to dispute. An arrow that strikes cleanly settles questions quietly. This trust influences how risk is distributed within the group. When danger or scarcity looms, those with demonstrated ability may be asked, implicitly or explicitly, to take the lead. Others may take on supporting roles that reduce overall exposure. This redistribution does not imply submission or dominance. It reflects pragmatic decision-making under constraint. Groups that ignore skill differences pay a cost. Groups that acknowledge them carefully gain resilience. Over time, reputations stabilize memory. Individuals are remembered not only for what they did, but for how reliably they did it. These memories persist even when conditions change. A hunter known for accuracy may be deferred to even when age reduces physical strength. Skill outlasts peak performance. The bow, by emphasizing control over force, extends the productive lifespan of individuals who might otherwise be sidelined. This has implications for social continuity. Knowledge remains active longer. Experience stays relevant. There is also an effect on cooperation itself. When outcomes depend on individual skill, cooperation must adapt. Rather than everyone doing the same task, cooperation becomes complementary. Different abilities are coordinated rather than averaged. This coordination requires communication and mutual recognition. People must know what others are good at. The bow encourages this awareness by making skill differences observable. Archaeologically, this coordination is difficult to see directly, but it may be inferred from spatial organization. Some sites show patterned activity areas suggesting repeated use by particular individuals or small groups. While such interpretations remain cautious, they align with a social world in which tasks are not evenly distributed but aligned with competence. The bow does not create specialization in the modern sense, but it nudges behavior in that direction. Importantly, this differentiation also introduces vulnerability. When success relies on a few skilled individuals, loss becomes more costly. Injury or death of a key archer can reduce group effectiveness sharply. This creates incentive to protect those individuals and to train others. Teaching becomes not only beneficial, but necessary for redundancy. Skill must be shared enough to prevent collapse. Thus, differentiation is balanced by transmission. This balance shapes social norms. Exceptional skill may be admired, but it cannot be hoarded. A group that allows knowledge to concentrate too narrowly risks fragility. The Bao therefore pressures societies to value both excellence and teaching. The most valuable individuals are not only those who perform well, but those who enable others to approach their level. This dual value stabilizes inequality before it hardens. We should note that none of this requires formal ranking or material reward. Difference is acknowledged through practice. Decisions are made accordingly. Respect is situational. Authority shifts with context. The Bao supports this fluidity because its demands are specific and observable. Skill is evident in outcome, not asserted through claim. Over long spans of time, these patterns accumulate. Variability in tools increases. Repair histories diverge. Use wear concentrates. Such traces, faint as they are, allow archaeologists to infer social differentiation without imposing modern categories. They suggest societies attentive to ability, cautious about its consequences, and adaptive in managing it. Difference, once visible, cannot be ignored. The Bao makes ability legible. How groups respond to that legibility shapes their social fabric. Over time, such responses leave marks on the archaeological record, subtle but persistent, waiting to be noticed. You're searching for a tool that shaped human survival for tens of thousands of years, and almost none of it remains. No wood, no sinew, no fibre, no bowstrings hardened by use. What survives instead are fragments that were never meant to speak alone. Stone tips, broken edges, impact scars too small to notice unless you already know what you're looking for. How do archaeologists follow a technology that almost never survives? The Bao rarely announces itself directly. Unlike stone blades or hammerstones, it is largely organic, built from materials that decay quickly outside rare preservation environments. Wood collapses into soil, sinew dissolves, plant fibres vanish. What remains is silence. And yet archaeologists have learned to listen to that silence carefully, not as absence but as pattern. We do not know for certain when the first Baos were made, but the evidence suggests that their presence can be inferred through changes in the objects that did survive. Projectile points begin to change shape. They become smaller, thinner, lighter. Their bases narrow. Their symmetry tightens. These are not aesthetic decisions. They are mechanical ones. A point designed for a thrusting spear must withstand compressive force. A point designed for a high-velocity projectile must endure sudden impact and rapid deceleration. The stresses are different, and stone responds differently to each. Under microscopic examination, impact fractures tell quiet stories. Certain break patterns appear only when stone strikes at high speed. Step fractures, bending initiations, spin-off flakes. These scars form when energy travels through the point faster than the material can absorb. They do not appear reliably on hand-thrown weapons. They appear when force is stored, released, and transferred almost instantaneously. These fractures are not definitive proof on their own, but when they appear repeatedly across regions and time periods, they begin to suggest a system rather than coincidence. Geography adds another layer. Archaeologists observe similar projectile point morphologies appearing across wide areas without corresponding preservation of wooden weapons. The spread is uneven but patterned. Certain forms emerge in one region, then appear elsewhere, separated by hundreds or thousands of kilometers. This suggests transmission of ideas rather than migration of specific objects. Knowledge travels even when materials do not. Experimental archaeology plays a careful role here. Researchers reproduce stone points using documented techniques and test them with different delivery systems: thrusting spears, hand-thrown darts, bow-launched arrows. They observe how each use damages the stone. Over time, a reference library of fractures forms. No single experiment proves the existence of bows in the deep past, but together they constrain what is plausible. Some damage patterns simply do not appear without stored energy systems. Yet, humility remains essential. Archaeologists are cautious not to overinterpret. A fracture pattern suggests possibility, not certainty. Environmental factors matter. Raw material properties matter. Post-depositional damage can mimic use wear. The ground itself can break stone in deceptive ways. For this reason, reconstructions rely on convergence. Multiple independent signals must align before a claim gains weight. The bow is therefore reconstructed sideways, not through finding the object, but through assembling the negative space it left behind. A pattern here, a fracture there, a distribution across landscapes. None are decisive alone. Together they form a silhouette. This method reflects a broader reality of prehistoric research. Much of early human behaviour involved organic materials: clothing, shelters, traps, bindings, tools of fibre and wood. These shaped survival as much as stone ever did. Their absence biases the record. Archaeologists work constantly against this bias, using indirect evidence to recover lost dimensions of human life. In this sense, the bow is not unique, it is emblematic. It teaches how to study what cannot be held. It requires patience and restraint. It requires acknowledging uncertainty without surrendering inquiry. Each reconstruction is provisional. New discoveries can revise old interpretations. This is not failure. It is how knowledge grows when direct evidence is gone. As reconstructions accumulate, the bow slowly shifts position in the human story. It moves away from myth and toward mechanism, away from heroic narratives and toward material processes. It becomes something understandable, something testable, something built from constraints and choices rather than legend. With every reconstruction, the bow becomes less myth and more mechanism. As these reconstructions grow more refined, they also grow more cautious. Archaeologists become increasingly aware that every inference carries a margin of error shaped by what has been lost. This awareness does not paralyze interpretation, but it tempers it. Claims about early bow use are often framed probabilistically, grounded in likelihood rather than declaration. This language reflects an ethical commitment within the discipline to resist certainty where the ground itself refuses to provide it. One consequence of this restraint is methodological creativity. When artifacts do not survive, researchers turn to distribution patterns across stratigraphy. They look for sudden shifts in tool size within otherwise stable assemblages. They examine ratios between point types and animal remains. They track correlations between lighter projectiles and changes in prey profiles. None of these lines of evidence prove the bow alone, but together they suggest a technological environment in which high-velocity projectiles would be advantageous. Temporal layering becomes especially important. In some regions, smaller projectile points appear gradually rather than abruptly. This suggests incremental experimentation rather than a single moment of invention. The bow likely emerged through many failed attempts, many hybrid systems, and many local solutions. Archaeology captures only the survivors of this process. The failures, made of perishable materials, remain invisible. What we see is not the beginning, but the point at which a technology becomes stable enough to leave consistent traces. There's also the question of absence across regions. Some areas show strong indirect signals of bow use, while others do not, even within similar timeframes. This unevenness reminds us that technological adoption is not inevitable. Environmental context, prey behaviour, cultural preference, and existing tool traditions all shape whether a new system takes hold. The bow does not spread simply because it is superior. It spreads where it fits. This variability complicates grand narratives. There is no single origin point that radiates outward cleanly. Instead, there are clusters of evidence that flare and fade. Archaeologists must resist the temptation to connect these clusters too neatly. Similar solutions can arise independently when constraints align. Convergent evolution applies to technology as much as biology. Scientific humility also appears in the way findings are revised. As analytical techniques improve, older interpretations are re-examined. Microscopic wear once attributed to bow use may later be reassigned. New experimental datasets refine fracture classifications. This process can feel destabilizing, but it is essential. The goal is not to defend a story, but to refine it. In this way, the bow becomes a case study in how archaeology operates at its limits. It shows how knowledge advances when evidence is incomplete, uneven, and biased toward durability. It reveals the discipline not as a catalogue of objects, but as a practice of inference. Archaeologists do not simply uncover the past, they reason toward it. For the listener, this matters because it reframes certainty itself. The bow is not known through discovery alone, but through accumulation of constraint. We know what it must have been like because alternatives fail to explain the evidence as well. This is a quieter form of knowing, but a powerful one. Knowledge grows sideways when direct evidence is gone, through comparison, exclusion, and careful reconstruction. Each step reduces mystery without eliminating it. The bow remains partially unseen but no longer unknowable. What if the most profound invention was not the bow itself, but the idea quietly embedded within it? Not wood bent by force, not sinew pulled tight, not the arrow waiting on the string, but the realization that an action could be completed later, that effort could be stored, carried and released when the moment demanded it. What if the true threshold crossed here was not mechanical, but temporal? For most of human existence before this point, tools acted immediately. A stone struck when the arm struck. A spear killed only at the instant of contact. Force lived entirely in the present. Action and consequence were nearly inseparable in time. The bow disrupts this arrangement. It introduces delay as a functional component. Energy is invested earlier, held silently, and released only when chosen. This is not simply a technical shift. It is a reordering of how cause and effect are experienced. We do not know for certain when humans first recognized this potential explicitly, but the evidence suggests that once stored energy becomes reliable, time itself becomes manipulable. Drawing a bow is an act of anticipation. The body commits effort without immediate reward. The mind must tolerate waiting. The moment of release is separated from the moment of preparation, and both must be imagined together for success to occur. This coordination is cognitive as much as mechanical. Stored energy embeds anticipation directly into technology. The bow does not function unless the user imagines the future state of the world, where the animal will be, how it will move, when release will matter. This imagining is not abstract in the philosophical sense, but it is predictive. It requires holding multiple temporal states in mind at once. The present action is shaped by a future outcome that has not yet occurred. Archaeologically, this shift is difficult to isolate, but its implications ripple outward. Technologies that follow the bow increasingly rely on delayed payoff. Traps operate on the same principle. Prepared hearths, caches of tools, eventually structures designed for use across seasons. Each relies on the same insight. Effort now can shape conditions later. The bow is not the first example of this thinking, but it is among the clearest early demonstrations of it in material form. In this sense, the bow functions as a cognitive milestone. It externalizes a mental capacity that may have existed earlier in more fragile forms. Planning surely preceded it, but the bow demands planning every time it is used. It enforces foresight. Without anticipation, it fails completely. This requirement stabilizes future-oriented thinking by tying it to survival outcomes. The mechanics reinforce the lesson. Energy must be stored within material limits. Too much tension breaks the wood. Too little fails to propel the arrow. Balance is learned through experience. This teaches restraint. Power becomes something managed rather than unleashed. The bow rewards control over excess. It favors calibration over force. This too shapes cognition. Success depends on modulation, not aggression. Once this principle exists, it becomes transferable. Other machines follow. Levers that accumulate advantage. Springs that release energy. Eventually, complex systems that store and transform force across time. The bow provides a template, not a direct ancestor of all machines, but an early demonstration that time can be engineered into function. Strategy emerges naturally from this framework. If time can be shaped, then sequences matter. Preparation gains value. Waiting becomes productive rather than passive. Decisions extend beyond immediate necessity. Survival begins to favour those who can imagine conditions not yet present and act accordingly. This does not eliminate chance, but it reduces dependence on it. We must be careful not to overstate continuity. The bow does not cause agriculture, metallurgy, or cities, but it participates in a lineage of ideas about deferred action. It shows that humans can build tools that operate in multiple temporal phases. This is a quiet but durable insight. The social consequences follow slowly. Planning becomes something that can be shared. Knowledge of preparation cycles spreads. Groups coordinate across time rather than only space. Memory becomes more valuable. Teaching becomes oriented toward future use, not immediate imitation. The bow thus contributes to a broader reorientation of human life toward extended horizons. From the archaeological record, we see increasing evidence of planning depth in later periods. Toolkits grow more diverse. Sites show repeated occupation time to seasonal patterns. Resources are managed across months rather than days. These developments cannot be attributed to the bow alone, but the conceptual groundwork aligns closely with its logic. At the level of individual experience, the bow changes how time is felt. Waiting is no longer empty. It is charged with intention. The drawn bow is a moment stretched thin between effort and release. This sensation, repeated across lifetimes, trains patience. It conditions restraint. It teaches that acting too soon can be as costly as acting too late. This shift does not erase immediacy. Humans still react, they still rush, they still fail. But the presence of a tool that rewards timing introduces an alternative mode of engagement with the world, one that values delay when delay improves outcome. In this way, the bow reshapes not only hunting, but expectation. The future becomes something that can be prepared for rather than endured. This does not guarantee success, but it changes orientation. Humans begin shaping the future before it arrives. From this moment on, tools no longer merely extend the body. They extend the mind forward in time. Long before metal, cities, or writing, a bent piece of wood taught our species that the future could be prepared, carried, and released when the moment finally came. As this way of thinking settles in, it quietly alters what it means to be prepared. Preparation is no longer limited to sharpening a tool or gathering materials for immediate use. It becomes a mental stance. To carry a bow is to carry unfinished action. The work is partially done, awaiting alignment between intention and circumstance. This condition becomes familiar, even comfortable. Humans grow accustomed to living with potential held in reserve. Over time, this familiarity reshapes how uncertainty is tolerated. A future that can be influenced, even slightly, feels different from one that must simply be endured. The bow does not eliminate unpredictability, but it reframes it. Chance is no longer absolute. It can be nudged. This subtle shift reduces reliance on reaction alone and encourages strategies that unfold across multiple moments. The mind learns to inhabit gaps between cause and effect without anxiety. This temporal awareness likely affects other domains of life beyond hunting. The same patience required to wait for the right release informs decisions about movement, shelter, and cooperation. Groups may choose when to relocate rather than responding only when resources are exhausted. They may return to known places at expected times. These behaviours appear archaeologically as patterned mobility rather than random movement. Again, the bow is not the sole cause, but it aligns with this broader orientation. Importantly, storing energy also introduces the possibility of restraint as an ethical practice. Power held but not used becomes a choice. The bow can remain undrawn. The arrow can stay on the string. This capacity does not guarantee restraint, but it makes it possible. Force is no longer inseparable from action. It can be withheld. This separation may contribute to more nuanced social interactions, where threat does not always become violence. There is also an intergenerational dimension. Teaching someone to use a bow is teaching them to think in advance. The lesson is not only technical, it communicates values about patience, timing, and judgment. These values persist even when the tool is absent. They shape how decisions are framed and evaluated. In this way, the bow becomes a carrier of cognitive habits that outlast its immediate use. Archaeologically, such habits are inferred indirectly through increasing evidence of planning depth and coordinated activity. Storage pits, reused sites, complex toolkits assembled ahead of need. None of these phenomena prove a direct causal link, but together they suggest a world increasingly structured around anticipation. The bow fits naturally within this world. It is both product and producer of forward-oriented thinking. What is striking is how quiet this transformation appears in the record. There is no sudden explosion of artifacts announcing the arrival of temporal engineering. Instead, there is a gradual accumulation of signs that humans are living differently with time. The bow is one of the clearest material expressions of this change precisely because it embodies delay so visibly. Its logic is legible even when its materials are gone. In the long arc of human history, this moment recedes quickly behind later innovations. Agriculture, metallurgy, writing, and cities dominate attention. Yet each of these depends fundamentally on the idea that effort invested now can shape outcomes later. The bow does not cause these developments, but it participates in the same conceptual lineage. It teaches the lesson early and repeatedly. Seen this way, the bow is less a weapon than a tutor. It trains the species in a new relationship with time, one where the future is neither fixed nor entirely unknowable, but partially responsive to preparation. This lesson, once learned, is not easily unlearned. And so, the bent wood, the taut string, and the waiting arrow quietly alter the human story. Not by force alone, but by teaching patience to matter,